Okay, thanks for coming. We're going to talk about some of the things that we need to, or we think we should be thinking about before we get underway with the projects. Once the procurement is done and you're getting ready to back your vendor truck up and unload all the consultants, what are the things that you could be thinking about before that process begins? So we have a great panel here of folks. We have about 100 years of experience between us. I'm Greg Dara. I'm with CGI. I'm a delivery guy. I work on managing projects throughout the state. I've worked with Franchise Tax Board, with Child Support. I'm currently working over at Secretary of State. And I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. We've got a great group to help you through this.
I'm Barbara Taylor. I'm the project executive on the VoteCAL project.
And I'm Faye Collier, and I'm from the Department of Healthcare Services.
And I'm Gerri Majors, and I've worked for the state of California for 32 years, and now I'm with CGI for the last 15 years.
So if you're like me, you always see a slideshow and wonder how many slides there are. There are 26. A lot of them don't have words on them. It's going really fast. We're not going to drain this thing for you. This is more of a discussion. This is not we're going to read slides to you. And if we start doing that, you can raise your hand and say, I can read. Stop doing that. Okay, so let's get started. No words. So before you start any masterpiece, before you start painting a masterpiece, you get your supplies together and you get going. You get ready for it. You don't just start painting and then go figure out which colors you need. Before you cook a gourmet meal, you prepare for it. You get all your supplies. So you get your tools, your supplies, your ingredients. You can tell I don't cook. I don't even know what those things are called. The food things. You get those together, and then.
You can tell he cooks, right?
Yeah, you get that. Somebody gets that stuff together, and before you start building, you have a foundation, and you have your. I live over in just south of town, and before that Fix 50 project started up, you could see those guys assembling their trucks for about 2 months beforehand. So you knew something big was up. You didn't know how big of a deal it was, but they didn't start on the first day they started the project. They started well beforehand. So that's what we're kind of talking about today: is engagement startup, and what are some of the best practices that we've seen and getting ready for it. So we have 9 of these to go through. Look, we're already on slide 6. This is great. We have 9 of these to go through. We're going to spend 8-10 minutes on each one and go through them. We'll talk about them for a little bit. We'll see if we covered all the points, and then we'll try to see if we can get you guys to talk about your experience a little bit. We got about 100 years between us. Actually, maybe more. I didn't realize Gerri had so many. We have about 115 years between us, but we also have 58 of you. So you've got more experience than we do. So let's talk about it. Okay, so let's start off with begin with the end in mind. Who wants to start off on this one, Gerri? All right.
As if that wasn't planned, right? Okay.
You can always say no.
So I think Paul said something kind of interesting today. He was talking about, conducting project triage. And when you begin with the end in the mind, you really are supposed to have a good vision of what you want, even at the project initiation, even at the project beginning. So one of the things I think that I've seen where people have been successful is that you're really right-sizing your project. So you envision what it is, and then you assess your capabilities against the end product, and then you start, I think, the triage right at the beginning. Am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? So you get the question. Geez, I can't stand not seeing everybody's face. Yeah. Or maybe if I stood up, I'd see you all on your phone, so maybe I should sit down.
They're taking notes.
They're taking notes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so you're starting a project, and it's kind of like, well, it's really nice what you're saying. How am I supposed to envision what it's going to be at the end when I'm just getting my project together and I'm really trying to make it successful? Well, there's a lot of ways that you do it. You go to, you have a COTS product vendor come in and they tell you that they're going to do everything to take your well-developed business problems and they're going to solve it that way. Or, a consultant will come in with a 25-page PowerPoint and say, I can address anything that you want within these 25 pages and do it. Most of the time, though, being on the state side, you do a lot of due diligence for your project. You understand the marketplace, you talk to the people around, you talk to people who have had failures, you talk to people who have had successes, because you're gonna learn in both places. You take that, you might put out an RFI, you start to get an idea of how it's gonna affect your organization. Now, a lot of our customers, and I know a lot of you, I know Franchise Tax Board does this real well, they start to take their business problems, not 100 of them, 4 or 5 that they're trying to solve within this project, and what they end up doing is they say, how is this going to affect the major groups? And how am I going to change the lives of these people? And in what manner am I going to be doing it? And so what they do then is they take the middle management tier, because, for example, at Franchise Tax Board, we're really putting a front end on all their legacy systems so that you can see a case, for example, consolidated from, the tax information system, from the audit systems, those kinds of things. And they say, for your middle managers, this is how it's going to change. For your call center people, this is the vision of how I'm going to solve this problem, and this is how it's going to affect the major people. And that helps you start to develop your vision. Then they also start doing an assessment of that. So the assessment is, for example, here's my vision, and here's the issues that we're going to have, here's the kinds of things that we're going to consider in that vision. What skill set change am I going to have, for example, within the organization? I've kind of done a list of things I think that might be a little bit helpful for you to think about within that visioning process. So basically, it's like, if I could find where my notes are. First, here's the kinds of major tasks and activities that you have to do. I'm right here now. Do you have the kind of people and the resources that are necessary? That's one of the things that you're going to look at. What kind of change are you introducing into the organization? Is this a change that's going to be cross-organizational, for example, or is it within one specific division within your organization? So what you're trying to do when you're answering all these questions is get a level of the complexity that you're looking at. So we talked about the project does it cross organizations? Did you change the metrics of the organization? For example, one of the major things you do sometimes when you do an organization is you're not counting the workload or the success factors the same way. For example, now maybe one of the things that you're doing within your organization is you're making revenue the most important metric, where before it was the amount of workload that you did. It's a big change for an organization to do that. Is there shifts in one workload? So you're taking one workload's, you're automating one workload in one division, and all of a sudden that doesn't have so many, and all those managers and supervisors who have built their careers based on the number of people that they have are now those people are going to be shifted to another division to do workload there because it's more important. How many processes does it touch? How much are you going to change those processes? How complex are those processes, or simplified are they going to be? What kind of technology and systems are you going to deploy? Do you have a skill set in the organization at the end of the game to actually take over that technology or that skill set that's going to be required either on the business side or the IT side? Are you putting in a COT system and your department really likes to deploy their own work? There are different kinds of things that you're going to assess when you're doing your impact. Then I think what happens is you do the impact by looking at the end in mind, and you determine whether the project can be scoped the way it is. So when Gopal says you don't do the $200 million project, I don't know if that works really well in the state of California for some of the statewide systems you put in. Doing it $5 million at the time, unless Carlos has really changed how you get the approval process. But there are times at the beginning when you assess your project, whether you scoped it right, can your organization stand the complexity, and can it implement and maintain a system that you're doing? If not, you have to rescope it right at the beginning. Typically, you rescope 2 or 3 times. And it's not as easy with some of the rules that we have in the state of California, but typically you rescope right at the beginning to make sure that your assessment is correct and you're actually going to be successful. You rescope after you've done your general design. It's a little late, but I've seen a lot of rescoping done at testing. Because once they start testing it and they actually get UAT in, they find out, you know what, this thing is really too complex, even though we didn't think it would be. So you're reassessing at each one of those periods of time. A lot of people do it at the end, but you don't have as much rework as if you start at the beginning and look to the end and keep the end in mind. So now, that's kind of one aspect of keeping, of beginning with the end in mind. My comment to you is, what are some of the other things when you think of the end state that help you when you start a project? Any comments? Because I'm going to call on people pretty soon. Sure.
Just have a comment.
So you are?
My name is Rosanna Wynn from the HIS Tax Board. We obviously have EDR. It's a huge project that we're working on right now. We have lots of institutional knowledge. But workforce planning is one of those things that, I think is a hot topic right now. But do you have any tips on, when you're looking at resources and the skill set, keeping those people, there at the end? I mean, because within turnover, it tends to be hard to kind of keep on the same path. When you have really good people and they're working really hard, and then they leave. I mean, are there any things that you can think of that you can, maybe think about earlier in the project that will help you at the end?
There's a couple things, and actually I think we're going to touch a few of them when we talk about staffing. There are a couple things. So there's program people you pull out of the program. One of the things is, I think, and the most successful projects, they need to be connected, stay connected somehow to their program itself. Because the more you pull them out into a program itself, they become known as, well, they're really the IT people and they're not really part of the program anymore and you've gone native, that kind of thing. So the more that you can keep them as advocates and they're still seen by their entities as very successful, and this is an important thing, that helps keep those people in place in the organization to help it on the business side. On the technology side, I find most people are interested in challenge. They like the challenge of their workload. They like new things. If you can keep them challenged during that period of time, sometimes it's hard to tell a person they're going to do the same type of thing for, on projects like franchise tax boards, there's 5 years. You can't tell somebody at the beginning that they're going to be doing the same thing 7 years from now. Most people don't want to do that. You need to do planning for those kinds of things. When you talk about KM, I tend, and not franchise tax board, because they have a different idea. They start KM much earlier. If it's knowledge management, I started like the last 2 years of the project, because I think most of those people are going to be around and you only have a certain amount of time. Franchise likes to start a lot earlier in the process, and they deal with the turnover at the same time. They just add it to it. So those are a few things, and we're going to touch on a few more. How about anybody that's been successful with keeping the end state in mind when they start a project? Any way that it helps you? Sure.
Well, my name's Mr. Tom with DMV, and I have had successful projects. So keeping the end state in mind is one of those challenges of keeping everybody in scope on the project, and it allows you at the end to trace back and see how those requirements were actually met. And that's a biggie. But at the end of the day, when somebody says, "Hey, we actually got what we wanted," wow, to me, that's just success in itself. When people are happy with the product that they got in the end. I've been on other projects where at the end of the project, they're like, "That's not what I wanted," and then they're like, "Well, can you trace that back?" No, because nobody did really good requirements. So it's kind of tracing all the way through.
So one of the tips that we had when we were talking about this particular item was evangelizing and socializing the end product, the end state is going to be, just for that purpose, so that people know, here's what it's going to be at the end, here's your scope, to try and help control scope creep. So like you said, have others had success with trying to do that and managing so that people knew what they were going to get and were happy with what they got? And if so, what did you use? How did you do it?
One of the things I do is I call it a day in a life, right? You get everybody to sit down in the room and say, okay, at the end of the day, at the end of this project, what's it going to look like? What are you going to see at the end? What do you picture yourself doing? And that's difficult for people to like really see. But at the end, what do you picture your job being? What's your role? Because a lot of the business side is going to have a big part of that. IT is going to be supporting that, right? And sometimes they can't see that picture. But if they can start kind of visualizing what that's going to be, it's just like building a house, right? If you know on your blueprint what it's going to look like in the end, you know all the steps you got to do to get to the end of that house. It's the same kind of thing.
That's a great example.
So I'd like to add, how many of you guys are not just project managers, but actually managers managing projects? Quite a few, right? So how do you keep your staff focused with the end in mind? And that's part of what I do on a normal day-to-day basis. Since I have a staff of 14 project managers, they range from small projects to large projects. How do you train them? How do you present to them that they need to keep the end in mind as they're working with their customers? It's very important with not just delivering the mechanics. Being a project manager, your structure, you're actually following the steps and the processes. But how do you teach them? How do you communicate to them the importance of not just start and end? Most of the projects within the department don't just end. You don't walk away. You're not like the vendor sometimes. Walk away. You actually have to face your program managers. You have to face your IT CIO, etc. So how do you show them what it is at the end that actually sustains itself, that you actually deliver, not just at the end of the project where you can check off, I've done up here, I'm done. It's actually after that. How is the system continue to be used? So as part of that job as a project manager, we're here, as Barbara indicated, evangelize what is the end. So a project manager has to internalize what that looks like, really believe it in a passionate way so that they can communicate it out appropriately. And that's really important because that is how you're going to sustain it through a 2-year project, a 7-year project, hopefully never a 10-year project. So.
Yeah,
So one good thing, okay, she evaluated with fiscal project.
thank you.
So one good thing about one of the good things that she did for us at fiscal is to have the deputies, each team, go back and look at the end in mind. How are we going to support this system? What do we need? What would our FSC, what we call the fiscal services, what would it look like when we go live? So we start planning early enough to kind of develop the skills that we need for support and for the one-time project, because you need
Yep.
2 different skills. There are some that you need right away. There are some that you need to maintain the system once we go live. So that kind of get us thinking in terms of resources and skills that we need. What will our FSC from technical, from change management? What are the things that we're going to do? So that kind of got the team thinking and putting things together to say, okay, when we go live, here are the positions that we're going to need, and here are the skill set that we might need in order to support the system. So I was having that end in mind.
You know, the
That's-
interesting thing nationwide, one of the things that we're starting to see is corporations, to some extent, governments in their RFPs that say, I need you to give me a system that has, that at the end can be sustained by this profile. In other words, I don't even want you to start bidding something where I have to skate so far out that I know I can't either retain those resources or I'm going to develop a methodology or I'm going to develop a set of people that I'm gonna make so good on the marketplace, I can't keep them within my organization. Or it's, what you're doing is too complex, you know? So we're seeing a few things that say, this is a profile I want you to skate to when you respond to us, which is kind of an interesting now approach. It's not necessarily you have to achieve that, it's this is a profile at the end that I want you to get me to, and don't go outside of this because you are responsible if we cannot. An interesting turnaround.
Yeah, it's a big difference between, I mean, we get so focused on building, right? Because once the project starts, you're building every day. And those are the things that are coming to you, all the problems with building. It's the requirements and the design and the development and the testing. It's the day-to-day pieces of building the system. But shifting and thinking about how are you going to live with it, both technically and as an organization, as a business, it's a big shift. So I love having people who have gone live with systems. People have that sort of operations, ongoing operations mindset on there, because then they're starting to think about those things early, and you can avoid those pitfalls where pure development mindsets. Developers are great people, but they don't think the same way as somebody who has to live with it for a long time. So let's see if we got all the ones that we had in our notes here. So these are slides that have lots of words. I'm not going to read them to you. Get to know your organization. I think we had that. Not ending up with a system that's too complex. We talked a bunch about that. Contrary to popular belief, we don't want to build a system for you that's so complex that we have to stay there forever to maintain it. Some of the happiest clients that we end up with are the ones who can take over the systems when we leave, and it's not too complex for them to take over. There's lots of considerations on getting them there, right? It doesn't just happen, but the knowledge management, the sharing of responsibilities as you really have to work towards a transition, but system complexity ties into that a lot. And then last one here, socialize, evangelize the vision for what the end product looks like. And we talked a bunch about that. What is it going to look like when we're living with this, not just when we're building it? So I think we covered those. And by the way, thank you. This is awesome having you guys talking too. No need for monologues from up here. Okay, so our next one is talking about leveraging existing tools and templates. I think, Faye, you're going to start off on this one? Thanks.
So within each of your departments, within your own branch or your own offices, you have lots of tools. You have the technical tools, you have the people tools. So everything that you put in the toolbox is going to help you be successful. So obviously, we all know that there are also entities out there that help us be successful, such as Department of Technology.
Can we go next one? All right, there we go.
So there's a lot of links on there, and there's a lot of helpful information on there. So specifically, I would like to call out CAPMM, but I'll go into that a little bit. But there's also other tools that we have to, from time to time, follow and understand what the policies are. Because if you violate some of those policies, you could actually drag out the project a little bit more than you like. Right?
Perfect timing, Carlos.
Every slide has your picture on it, by the way.
So I would like to highlight, obviously, as a project manager, we need to know about the SAM. We need to know about the SIM. And I'm not going to go into detail about each of those because there's a lot of information in each of those particular manuals and documents that you can look at. But going back, I like to highlight the CAPMM. I know not everybody will love CAPMM. There's somewhat of a love-hate relationship based on what I had got the consensus of. But for the most part, though, it actually sets the pattern for how we're going to execute a project. It's a methodology. It's not something that you need to follow step by step, but as a project manager, as a manager managing project managers, we need to highlight the importance of it. Because there's a lot of non-specific things that we don't normally think about. When we actually call out, okay, we need to do a charter, we need to do a feasibility study, we need to do project reports, more specifically during the execution phase. Everybody know we need to report up to Department of Technology. And so with that target, everybody's very focused on that. But there are specific information in each of the steps that are under CAPMM that helps you plan it out, really walks you through the process. Rather you have to submit something to your executives, rather you have to submit something to your agency or external to the Department of Technology. Each step walks you through the process. It really makes you think through the process of how important it is to understand what are the things, the non-tangible things that you have to think about. And then there's also the vendor's tool. And I would like to, for just to highlight, most of the project management office have some form of a project management tool that they use, right? Microsoft Project, but in a much more robust arena, typically there's these tools out there that what they call portfolio and project management tools. And take a look at those as well. See what they have internal to it, more than just a project schedule tracker. What does it offer you? How does it help you managing risk? How does it help you managing the issues that are at hand? What kind of stories does it help you to tell your executives? So going back to the earlier slide, paint the picture, keeping people motivated, right? And bringing and highlighting things appropriately. The tools itself will help you do that. So that will also be something that you can use as your status report, or as we heard earlier, the bullshit report. But the thing is, it's what you put in it that really will paint the picture for you. There's a lot of other tools, and as I mentioned earlier, these are the software tools that I mentioned, but there's the people tools. Don't forget that. The institutional knowledge that you mentioned earlier, right? How do you utilize those assets to ensure that your project reaches success? So if you have new staff coming on board, they don't have the understanding about the organization. They don't have an understanding about the culture. How do you leverage them? How do you marry them up with the new staff so that they actually learn through that experience and exposure? That's also something that we need to look at. Now, tools, again, going back to soft skills too. Relationship management. So those are some of the key pieces that we also have to keep in mind. It's not just the physical, tangible tools, but how do you maintain that relationship with your program area, with the external folks such as stakeholders. Those are all part of tools that you need to think about as you're defining what is considered successful. And so what else? Now this is out back to you guys. So what other tools do you guys or have you guys used that you find will be part of your tool in the toolkit? Yes?
Not so much from EDD, Jan Barnett. Not so much for the project management, but from the beginning, if it's, EDD has a lot of very, very complex systems that are not just, you don't just do one thing. It travels, it has a life of many, many days, and they actually call them business days. When a claimant files a claim, and then they make a payment, and then they have a continued claim, there's many, many things that happen. So if we start our requirements traceability early on and include our enterprise testing office, because we have a huge testing office, and if we integrate them in the beginning and make sure that those requirements are things they can test and work it through, it's a huge, huge difference. And I know this one tool is expensive, but it's wonderful, is HP's Quality Center. And it allows you to start your requirements early on, and the testers then can track it all the way through, and you can get a lot of statistics on it. But getting the enterprise testing office from the very beginning involved and understanding your requirements is key.
That's great, thank you. Oh, two hands. Go ahead, Barbara. You, go ahead, yeah.
I think the question isn't so much about what tools do we use, but why do we use them and how do we use them? Because there are tons of tools out there and templates and the PMM and things in PMI, and project managers are great plagiarizers. We borrow and leverage things from each other, and that's great. But you always have to be thinking about what is the purpose of this tool. And I think one of the pitfalls is going, I have to check the box, I have a risk log check, I have a schedule check. Well, are they good? Are they useful for communicating? Because every project management tool out there is really only there for the sake of communication. And I think what Faye said, what stories do they help you tell? So every project management tool is there to help you tell a story, either to your executive or to your project team members or to your stakeholders. So really think about what value do those tools bring to the project in enabling you to communicate, to remove the barriers, escalate what you need to, evangelize the project, all of those kinds of things. So it's not what tool you have, but do you know why you have that tool and how to apply it? And so I think that's where the networking that Carlos was talking about, meeting other project managers and talking to them about how do you use these tools so that it's more than just an administrative thing that I checked the box, I did that process, but make those tools work for you.
Can I add one? One of the things we did early on, after we'd signed the contract, we're waiting for the vendor to come on board, is we pulled together some of our tools and we met with our executive sponsor and said, here's some samples of the ways that we can report to our steering committee and we can report to you. We would like some feedback from you on what is your, how do you prefer to be communicated with? What do you like to see? And we've, over the years, we've had to kind of modify and grow with that a little bit too with our steering committee. What level of detail do you want? At our steering committee, we've been incredibly transparent with our steering committee and our legislature, but do you want to hear it all? Do you want it all in writing? And we'll speak, we'll orally give you the highlights, but we'll give you 70 pages of writing. Do you want us to walk you through every detail? So you have to be, I think it's really important to also be very, kind of flexible and fluid, but I think at the very early stages of your project, look at your toolkit and meet with your sponsor, with your executive sponsor, and talk about what is their preference, because people have different preferences for communication and how they want their information, and you want to make sure that you're providing the right information and telling the right story in a way that makes sense to your sponsor so that they're getting what they need out of it. So have that initial conversation. Carlos has got it.
I wanted to reemphasize what you were saying, because that is such an important point. In my job, I did oversight of a lot of different projects, and over, the projects that get themselves in trouble, and even some of the ones that have failed or that we had to pull the plug on, when you went back and looked at their tools or their logs or their risk and the risk tracking systems or whatever it was, whatever reports, a lot of times there were clear indicators in there. So people were doing what you said, they were tracking or they were checking things, but they weren't looking beyond that to say, okay, well, it's on there, it's reported, so I've done my job. They really weren't. What was happening is that those issues weren't getting addressed, and the longer they went, the more they put the project at jeopardy. And in some cases, actually, have ultimately sunk projects because nothing was done about it. So I think the point you made is a really good one.
Here's another aspect to it too, is setting the culture around the project tools. Because there's two things that happen. If you're a project manager, I don't know how many times you've sat in a room and said, how can I understand that this issue is only coming up now, when I know you guys have thought about it for the last, had to be dealing with it for the last 3 months. So it's how do you set a culture where when you use tools, they're used by the right level of the organization, that you give them tools. Sometimes we divide up our project management tools. It's not only do you have, the overall project management tools, but for issues and decisions and those kinds of things, they don't always have to come up to everybody on top. We divide up our project management tools, so for example, within a division, the testing people have their own issues, etc. They like it better, they're more willing to put them on there, and then once they put them on there, they start then, is this important enough by some metrics we use to make it up to the top level. You have to make the tools easy for risk, and you have to set the culture that says, it's okay for me to say this. I'm not outing the other division. I'm trying to help us in total. And so setting the culture around the tools is a very important aspect of getting the right kind of information on it so that you can deal with it.
We keep jumping in on your question. Go ahead. Or comment, excuse me.
using that words, leveraging existing tools, a lot of the things when we actually work on projects is assess what we currently have by saying the common saying, what are the tools that I have right now? I don't want to reinvent the wheel again. So we always look at past experiences, may it be resources from other departments, using them greatly and making sure that, the best practices out there are available for us to look at. Assess all the failures that happen to different projects and learn from them and, make good decisions afterwards from those failures, as well as look at the successes. What worked in those departments or what worked in the current department that you can reuse again in future projects. Also, come up with a checklist as far as, as you go through the project management methodology, what are all the steps that we need to actually look at that work for that project to be successful. So those assessments will help us with, looking at those tools. Expertise all around the State Department. Keep those networks, just like what we were told earlier, having those relationships and looking at what worked with them and also use the experts. That would also help us with successful projects.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I mean, and Carlos mentioned in his talk this morning, and there are lots of highly publicized failures, but each of our organizations has a lot of good successes too, and it's always important to look at those and see what worked rather than look at the failures and be afraid of treading that same path again, because there's a lot of success that we can learn from too. It's important not to develop this sort of fear of failure mentality, because a lot of these projects can be and are successful, and we need to learn from those as well. So we'll move on from the tools a little bit. There's some really good discussion. Thank you all for participating on this. Again, as we heard this morning, tools are not a replacement for skills or for knowledge or for experience. We're not trying to build the rocket-powered mule. But there are a lot of tools out there, and those have a foundation of other people's experience, and we should be able to learn from that if we can. So thank you.